Tēnā koutou and kia ora, thank you so much. I'm delighted to be invited to present to you some findings. You will be the first group that sees these findings. Some of you have seen the initial suggestion of the project at Crazy and Ambitious earlier this year. I'm here as the representative of a multi-agency team that's been funded by the National Science Challenge to look into the social aspects. What do New Zealanders think about the novel forms of technology? You'll see my team up there, and some of my colleagues are sitting in the audience, so if you have questions, feel free to find them and ask them more details about the project. You'll note that we're not only a multi-agency team, but we're a multidisciplinary team. Social scientists, geneticists, biologists, and ecologists coming together to recognize that although the technology might be possible in 5, 10, 20 years, if we don't have the social license, the technology won't be used. So we have this ambition to be predator-free by 2050, but as you're well aware, the current technology is not going to get us there, and that we were really looking for advancements, particularly in the genetic field. So we'll talk about gene drive and Trojan female and a species-specific toxin. But again, we were fortunate enough that the National Science Challenge recognized that we really must understand and engage with the public over these techniques. As one of my colleagues who's a geneticist in Australia has said, I don't want to spend the next decade of my life perfecting gene drive and emerge from my laboratory, throw off my coat and go, ta-da, I figured it out, only for the public to go, we don't want it. Just because science can do it doesn't mean the public wants it. And this project, recognized by the National Science Challenges, is the first one that is purely social science. So other projects within the challenge have social science components, but we're quite fortunate to be the pure social scientists. The project I'm going to talk to you about has multiple funders that you'll see, and we also are fortunate to pair with Mātauranga Maori researchers, and I will not be speaking about the Mātauranga Maori that is coming and emerging from this research because it's not appropriate for me, but if you would like to know more, please contact Mel, Amanda, or Ocean, who are leading that aspect. So, new technology. Why don't we just tell people the facts about new technology? Well, let me ask you a question. You've just been diagnosed with heart disease, and the doctor comes in and says, I'm going to inject you with nanotechnology. How do you feel about that? Generally, your response of people looks something like this, the bell-shaped curve. It's known as the innovation curve. Most of us would sit there and go, nanotechnology in my body? I don't know much about it. Tell me more. Some of you would say, yep, give it to me. I'm into new things. And then a small percentage of you would be on the other side of the curve and say, no, I don't think so. So that's the diffusion of innovation curve that's been shown over and over in new technology, how people respond to it. Most of us go, tell us more, but so there's a small group that say no and a small group that say yes. What happens when you just tell them the facts? When the medical doctor explains to you what nanotechnology is? This happens. The people in the middle tend to shift to have lesser support of that new technology over time. This has been proven overseas in the US and in Europe with nanotechnology, synthetic biology, agrotechnology, and driverless cars. The reason is humans make decisions based on their heart and their gut, not on facts and more information. You probably don't believe me, but it is true. The majority of our decisions are made on our heart and our gut. Psychologists, we call that heuristics, rules of thumb. It got us to live today, and so usually we trust our heart and our gut more than the facts. So when you have a fact-based conversation, what happens is you quickly polarize the audience, and they start just zinging facts and alternative facts and more alternative facts until the divide becomes greater and greater, and there's no conversation that is occurring, just polarization. So we recognize that, and so we wanted to do a study with the nation to see what they think about novel technologies, the 3 forms that I'll tell you a little bit more about. But more importantly, we wanted to explore the underlying values and beliefs, the heart and the gut, how these people are making the decisions about those novel forms of technology. We are not going to speak about demographics. You will not hear me talk about age or gender or any of that. Demographics can be misleading, leads to stereotypes. Instead, what we're going to talk about is values. And as Jamie noted, we are not a homogeneous group. So what we looked at is to see how naturally occurring clusters of people in New Zealand came together based on their values, and also how they were making the decision about the novel forms of technologies. So we were going to look to see what naturally occurring clusters occur in New Zealand. I'm going to be light on methods and statistics, but I love those topics, so please come and ask me more, ask my colleagues about more of the details. So it's an online survey to almost 8,200 New Zealanders, massive sample size, so that we can do some amazing stats with it. It was a 20-minute survey distributed through Colmar Brunton, and it was representative of the nation. So we really mimicked the demographic variables that the census lays out so that we could get a representative response rate from the nation. What did we look at? Like I said, we looked at how people feel about novel pest techniques, but we also pulled from overseas literature, again looking at new technologies, about variables that seem to influence people's decisions. People don't make decisions about novel technology purely from a conservation value perspective. So we did look at their environmental values and their conservation values. We looked at their current attitudes towards pest control, but we also looked at their general personal value system. This is a wheel, and I won't go into too much detail about it, but it tells you information about people and what do they care about. Are they motivated by themselves, or are they more altruistic towards others? Are they open to new things, or are they steeped in tradition? The value is a wheel value. There's no right or wrong in a value system. You cannot fundamentally change people's values. And so we're not looking at changing, we're looking at understanding their value system. And we need people across all value systems for a healthy, functioning society. We also looked at how people view society. Again, how people interact with people, how they see the power structure in New Zealand. It's very important and will influence how they make decisions. We looked at trust in organizations, because often who is saying the message really influences how people receive the message, if you haven't figured that one out. We looked at very specific New Zealand conservation attitudes and beliefs, because New Zealand is different. Most of this research is based on international research, but the US is a much different context and has a much different socio-political climate than New Zealand. And we looked at scientific knowledge, both general scientific knowledge and pest New Zealand specific knowledge. The reason we did this is that I had a colleague who said, well, I just think all New Zealanders need to take an introductory genetics class, and then they would understand gene drive, and they'd get over it. No, that's not going to happen. And so I will show you what people's scientific knowledge, how it does influence or does not influence their opinions about these forms of technology. So we looked at 3 forms: gene drive, Trojan female, and a species-specific toxin. I'm going to give you the quick elevator pitch about gene drive. In gene drive, you copy and paste a trait that occurs in that species, and you copy and paste it so all the females will have that trait. So in this particular case, they're going to copy and paste a gene that codes for maleness. Overseas, they call this project Mamas Who Only Have Boys. So that in the laboratory, you genetically cut and paste the male gene so that the mother only has boys. You then release those females into the wild, and over time, that species only becomes male, and the species dies out. Trojan female is a little bit different. Again, not to go into too much detail, but females can have males that are infertile. These can be selectively bred for in the laboratory and released into the wild so that those females only have infertile males. And again, over time, there's no viable offspring and the species goes extinct. A pest-specific toxin is just that. There's very many close to markets that are being developed overseas and in New Zealand. So what we did is those were the 3 specific techniques we were looking at, and we measured people's perceptions 3 different ways. It's really important, especially when I wear my psychologist hat, how it's not an opinion poll. We're not asking you, what do you feel about gene drive, yes or no? It's very tricky. People don't make decisions in a black box. Instead, we measured it 3 ways. 1, their gut reaction. What do you think about gene drive? The second was we gave them factual information about what gene drive or Trojan female was and measured their reaction. And then we used a third tool called choice modeling. If there's any economists in the room, you'll be familiar with this way. It's a real robust way to measure people's perceptions of things, because often when we make choices, it's not black or white, it's about trade-offs. And in choice modeling, you pick different attributes and you mix and match those attributes, and you allow people to choose between scenario A or B or C, which is neither. And what happens is you can take those attributes and line them up to find which attribute has greater acceptance versus lower acceptance. So the attributes we looked at were the target species. We picked rats and wasps. We went through a social process to pick these 2 target species. If you have questions, you can talk to Eric Edwards, my colleague who ran that process. And then we threw in stoats to align to another project that is also being run by Land Care Research. I've talked to you about the techniques that we used, and we looked at infertility or death as the outcome. Some earlier research that the Department of Conservation had done found that there is concern about some of the current methods because they're toxins and they result in death. So we wanted to see if infertility versus death made an influence on people's opinions about the new techniques. And then we looked at ground and aerial distribution. So again, you could take all those attributes and line them up to understand which has greater or lesser support. And you can also look at the interaction of these attributes. So we can come to realize, is gene drive in wasps, does that have stronger support than gene drive in rats? Could be a good indication of perhaps what technique could be rolled out first. So the results were really interesting. We used latent class analysis, again, a statistical tool that I can talk to you more about, and 4 clusters emerged. Think of these as hats. These are not people, these are perspectives, or hats that people wear when making decisions. Sometimes I put on my mom hat. I'm a mother of 2 girls. Sometimes my decisions, I'm wearing my mom hat. Sometimes my decisions are, I'm wearing my Department of Conservation hat, and sometimes I might be wearing my psychologist hat, and sometimes I play soccer, I might be wearing my soccer hat in the decisions I make. I can put on different hats, but depending on the circumstance, I'm usually only wearing 1 hat. So keep that in mind. Also, each perspective is very complex. I like that as a psychologist because people are messy. We're difficult, we're irrational, we do the funniest things. And you must have understanding of the messiness of people to understand how difficult it is often to engage with people over topics. It also means I have job security. So what are the results? Well, overall, so here's some top line results. 61% of the respondents, so the nation, has heard of Predator-Free 2050. That's amazing. I was quite surprised by that. It's been a year since the initiative was announced, and 61% of the people are aware of it. What's more impressive are the next 3 figures. Overall, about 85% of the people agree pests are a problem in New Zealand from a conservation perspective. 14% think we're doing enough, and 85% want us to do more. That's great. The nation knows we have a problem with pests, and they want to do more. The sticking point is what they want to do, and more importantly, why they want to do it as we move forward. And that's where our research can help highlight what the nation is thinking and why about these novel forms of technology. So let me walk you through some results. Remember that curve I showed you, that bell-shaped curve? Here's the results from the gut reaction. Hey nation, what do you think about gene drive? Classic textbook bell-shaped distribution. Now, when we gave them the facts, here's the definition of gene drive. Look what happens. They shift. It's classic textbook, yay! So what that says to me is that how we're making decisions about gene drive is it aligns to how humans make decisions. We're making it with our guts and our heart. So really interesting. It also means that we can look to overseas literature about how they've engaged on novel technologies, and we can actually learn from how they did it really poorly, and we won't do that here in New Zealand. Let me walk you through some more results so that you can see the difference between the three methods and what the nation is thinking at this particular moment in time. So I've got Trojan female gene drive and the pest-specific toxin. I've categorized the data just so that you can see it a little bit more. So you have those people who have greater support, the group that's in the middle, and that group that has lower support. And so you'll notice where those percentages lie. So very interesting, at this particular moment, species-specific toxin, people seem to be looking forward to that, have greater acceptance of that. And you'll notice gene drive seems to be that nice flat. People haven't made up their mind yet. It's really split. So now when we look at the attributes, I found these results quite fascinating. So this is again from the choice modeling data where you can line up the attributes. So not surprising, people have the most support for on-the-ground delivery, and people have the least support for on the air. This has implications not only for those three new techniques, but anyone who's in the biosecurity and hopes to fly airplanes over people and release any form of control. What I found that was quite interesting is notice the difference between Trojan female and gene drive. Do you see the big gap between the two? We conducted, before we ran the survey, we ran focus groups to double check the survey and work out some of the problems. And from that qualitative work, some patterns emerged which we'll explore further in the next phase of the research. But the respondents really fed back to us a couple of reasons why they might have a preference over Trojan female. One, the term. Trojan female sounds cool. Sign me up for that. Woohoo! Do you know anything about it? Nope, but I love the term. Let's go. Another thing is that gene drive has the G word in it, genetic. So maybe people are using their heart and their gut. They're reacting to the term gene because it has the G, it's genetic. And the third alternative could be at the heart of the two different tools. Gene drive is genetically editing, where Trojan female is about selective breeding. Some of the respondents really fed back that they found Trojan female or genetic gene drive was playing with nature, whereas Trojan female, they understood it if they had an agricultural or farming background or worked with pedigree dogs because they understood selective breeding. All those ideas will be explored further in the second phase of our research, where we'll be running focus groups to really explore the differences and the nuances. Also, I want to point out I was quite surprised that death had a higher attribute than infertility, but that's on average. And when I talk to you about the different perspectives that emerge, what you're going to quickly see is that's a national average, and really what happens is groups split quite a bit. So 4 perspectives emerged. Keep in mind these are hats. You may not see that you fit perfectly into one of these. That's normal. You will most likely have a dominant perspective, but you might have little attributes that you fall in the other ones. So keep that in mind. They're not people. These are lenses how people are making decisions. So the first perspective was a humanitarian perspective. People in this who use this perspective hold the perspective that all life is important, and they believe that native and non-native species have similar rights, and they are not supportive of current pest techniques and would not be supportive of pest-specific toxins because of the death element. They believe in the sanctity of all life. However, because gene drive and Trojan female can result in the targeted organism living out its natural life, but just not having offspring, they were quite open to these novel forms of technology. The second perspective was an individualistic perspective. They really prioritize their personal freedom and choices, and they're not supportive of any current forms or future forms of technique. This perspective is dominated by an extreme distrust of all organizations, especially government, and any top-down mandates. They have a high knowledge of the New Zealand context, so it's a very niche topic where they actually have high knowledge of it, but again, they're characterized by extreme distrust. The third perspective was a pragmatic perspective. So they tend to hold this perspective and they support current forms of technology because of the economic benefits. People who hold this perspective didn't have a high knowledge or awareness of the New Zealand conservation context, but they were extraordinarily supportive of what's going on now, and they would be okay with a pest-specific toxin. However, they didn't see the need for massive leaps towards new technologies such as Trojan female and gene drive because they just didn't see it was necessary. But they had a high trust in business leader and church leaders and would be receptive from messages from those entities. The fourth was a very scientific, evidence-based perspective. People in this perspective really waited for evidence to make their decision. They had high scientific knowledge. They extraordinarily trusted scientists, and they would listen to scientists, and they trusted elected officials. They currently are supportive of pest control methods, and they would be supportive of a species-specific toxin, but they have not made up their mind about gene drive and Trojan female because the evidence isn't in. So they're taking a wait-and-see approach. So you can see those four different perspectives. What do we do with these perspectives? Well, one of the things is for those of us, the royal we, that are looking at engaging the nation in conversations about novel technology or conservation, the first thing is we need to recognize which perspective we fall into and have empathy and understanding for the other three. We are not here to change people. You cannot force people to change. But if you actually start having conversations with them based on their value system, then they're more likely to listen to you. Jamie alluded to this quite eloquently. If you have a connection with them, rather than zinging facts at each other, that facilitates the conversation. So it's really important for us to recognize that. So in short, people agree that we have a conservation program. Phew! Good job, everyone in the room. They understand conservation's a problem and that we need to move things forward. But the how and why varies. They haven't made up their mind about the novel forms of technology, but if we just have a factual-based conversation, it will lead to polarization of the nation and shut down the conversation. We're hoping to facilitate a values-based conversation. And a values-based conversation means you still have the facts and the information, but you go to those people and find out what they care about and have a true conversation with them. You must have empathy. There's no right or wrong. No one's values are wrong. No one's dumb. It's all about what they care about. And what they care about may not be what you care about, and that's actually okay. We hope that this research can be serve not just those of us that are looking at pest control, but also the wider environmental and biosecurity issues. And we hope that it's a template for how to engage the nation on a whole range of social issues that are looking at using technology to possibly move this country forward. So the next steps today is the first time that we've shared this results in a public forum. So we're very excited and delighted to do that at the Cape City Conference in recognition of the great work that's been going on. We're hoping to present to the regional councils, biodiversity, biosecurity, and communication managers. We have a whole host of speaking engagements, and we'll have an insights report which really details the information that I've just highly brushed over coming in the new year. So happy to talk more about the details. Those perspectives are fascinating. As a psychologist, I could talk for hours on it, but we don't have hours. Best always over a glass of wine. And just to reiterate that the next phase of the National Science Challenge research is to run those focus groups. so that we can go to the people and try and test and understand some of the nuances of these different perspectives and their opinions of the novel form of technology. And the final aim is we're going to put our money where our mouth is and try and see if we have a values-based conversation, does that actually lead to a conversation and stop the polarization that often happens in these sort of conversations. Thank you for your time.